Okay, now we are streaming live on Facebook, so we can officially kick off this webinar organized by joint forces from the Center for Market Education, a Malaysian think tank, Students for Liberty, a worldwide organization of students active in promoting individual liberty, and a very prestigious Malaysian university, Universiti Teknologi Mara, here represented by Professor Firdausi Suffian. And our main speaker will be Professor John Hearn from the London Institute of Banking and Finance. My name is Carmelo Ferlito, and I'm the CEO of the Center for Market Education. I would like to thank everybody for having joined this webinar, and to our partners, Students for Liberty and Universiti Teknologi Mara. We have been quite silent in terms of webinar for a few months because we have been very active in policy advocacy in these crazy times. But we want to restart quite regularly with this activity. And in particular, we want to devote a few webinars to monetary theory. This one is the first of a series, and I think it comes very timely for a series of reasons. Let me immediately say that if some of you is here to learn how to invest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and make money, this is not the right webinar. So this is not an investment webinar. This is a monetary theory webinar. And we choose the title MMT, Cryptocurrencies and the Future of Money, for a very specific reason. As a person that had worked for quite some time in history of economic thought, I know that monetary theory is an important part of economic thought since the very beginning. The first important dispute in economic theory is instead the one happening between Plato and Aristotle on the fact if money should be metallic, represented by a good, or should be fiat money. So Aristotle was standing with the metalist and Plato was standing with the cartalist. So the debates on money is a debate that dates back almost 3,000 years for what we know. However, and then of course we have in most recent times important books on monetary theory. You think about Fiscal, you think about Mises, and then the Italian school on the monetary circuit with Graziani. Of course, the monetarist, we have an economics school that was led for many years by Milton Friedman that was called the monetarist school. So the word money was in the name of the school. But however, the monetary part of economic theory has always been conceived as something a little bit exoteric, I would say. So something for the elite of thinkers, something very complicated, difficult to understand, despite we all realize that indeed the role of money is an important role in our daily lives. But in recent times, we have two phenomena, which are MMT, from the part of theory, and I discussed MMT in a webinar also a few months ago with Professor Jomo here in Malaysia. You can find the link on YouTube. And the other is cryptocurrencies. So we have macro phenomena that enter the popular discussion. So we have seen discussions about MMT and cryptocurrencies on newspapers, on blogs, on the internet. And this is particularly significant because it means that monetary theory and monetary revolutions are entering the houses and the minds of the lay people. And this is probably the first time that happened in the history of economic thought that the debate about money is so much popularized. And this debate, I believe, is also timely, and Professor John will discuss this in his presentation, because we are living a very peculiar time, we know, in which we are experiencing, and we already start to see the signs of a deep dichotomy between the financial economy, the monetary economy, and the real economy. The real economy is depressed. We know that. The world economy is under stress because of the lockdowns that have unprecedentedly shut down our economic activities. On the other side, the choices that most of the governments in the world have made to address the woes created by the lockdowns in terms of fiscal policy and monetary policy have created a huge amount of money into circulation. So we have an excess of liquidity somehow, and this can be already seen in a growing prices in raw materials. I believe, as I wrote in a recent op-ed, that this dichotomy sooner or later will explode in our hands, and probably will explode when we will be at the beginning of the exit from the COVID crisis. So, and this is risking to break the legs of the recovery. And I hope that Professor Hearn will have chance also to discuss this dichotomy later on. So this was my introduction. I'm happy to see that we have quite a number of attendees. So good job to everybody, and good also the choice of the topic. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the Center for Market Education YouTube channel. So you will find it there. But we are in this moment also live on Facebook. So the video will be available on Facebook as well. And we will come back. We will be back with another event on monetary theory on the 29th of June, with the presentation of a book recently published by Cambridge University Press, Central Money and the Rule of Law, Money and the Rule of Law, authored by three authors. One of them is Peter Bottke. So now I pass the microphone to Professor Suffian for a more general introduction, and happy to kick off this cooperation with your alma mater.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carmelo. Thank you for the introduction. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone, depending which time zone you are in. And welcome to the webinar entitled MMT, Cryptocurrency and the Future of Money, organized by the Center of Market Education and also co-organized with Student for Liberty and Universiti Teknologi Mara, Sabah. So just before we start, just want to let everybody knows that just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. Yeah. So we'll let the speakers speak for today 45 minutes later on, and follows by a Q&A. And then you can ask the speaker, you can post the question in the Facebook, right, or in Facebook, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, what is the future of money? So I guess money is not something new, like Dr. Carmelo mentioned just now. Even 3,000 years ago, Aristotle and Plato already discussed how should we perceive money. So how should we? So the future of money, how is it like? What would be in the future, right? Given the crisis that we went through, is not just the first one what we had right now, the pandemic like crisis. We went through, this world went through a few crises. So how should we perceive management of money? Then what's wrong with the current monetary theory, or what's wrong with MMT? So the debate on monetary theory and its policy isn't something new. It has been long discussed by many economic scholars before this, right? So recently, after the world faced a pandemic-led crisis, and MMT somehow takes a center stage among economists. So even though MMT has an unconventional way of thinking money, but it is believed to be a convenient way to resolve our crisis. Most politicians would think like that, right? Because with fiat money, it helps to finance government spending. So you can print money, and then the government just the government can set the value of the money. On the other hand, the rise of e-commerce for the past decades, which further accelerated by the recent crisis, a lot of transaction depends on digital platform too. So the emergence of blockchain, which give rise to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency, again put challenge on the printed money and how should we value money. But of course, the main concern of cryptocurrency, of course, like Dr. Carmelo mentioned just now, this is nothing to do with whether you should invest on cryptocurrency, which cryptocurrency you should invest, but it's just that the questions of money, will it be replaced, right? But again, cryptocurrency, the main concern over it is always the security, safety, and also the acceptance by the financial institution. So ladies and gentlemen, so what's the future of money? So today we are very pleased to have Professor John Hearn. He's currently a visiting professor at the London Institute of Banking and Finance. He's a controversial figure. He publishes many articles talking about money and also offer constructive criticism on the modern monetary theory. So reading from his work, I can tell, John likes to promote the principle of free market capitalism and also expose the fundamental flaws in Keynesian economics. But of course, the purpose is to enlighten people the wisdom of monetary reason. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, now I'd like to invite Professor John. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Firdausi and Carmelo. So let me also thank the Centre for Market Education for inviting me, because there are lots of think tanks around the world and almost all of them are concerned with telling governments what to do and how they can do things better and how they can do more things. And there's just one or two around the world who are telling governments that there is an alternative to government intervention. We've got the Adam Smith Institute and the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. We've got the Mises Institute in the USA, and now we've got the Centre for Market Education in Asia. So thank you very much for the invite. I'm going to talk behind some slides, so I apologize for this. I would normally just have a few little additional things behind me to prompt me on what to say, but I've given more detail on slides so that afterwards people can reflect upon the things that I am saying. So I will endeavour to share my screen now and hope that this gets us going. And I need to check, can we move? Yeah, we can. Right, so I hope then everyone gets my first screen and the title. The title is not quite the same order, but I'm going to follow that order. I'm going to start with money, because you've got to know, before we know the future of money, you've got to know what money is. Then I'm going to talk about modern monetary theory, and I'm rather critical of it, as you will see, and it has opened some doors towards cryptocurrency, and I'll explain why as we go through that, and I will explain also the future of cryptocurrency when I'm talking about the future of money. There is an economic health warning that I have to give everybody, because my opinion is not generally shared among every economist, and therefore I need to set myself in context so that you will understand my position and where we're coming from. And if you look at this, it's the sort of right and left, and the right and left in economics is different from the right and left in politics. I, for no other reason, put some numbers here, and my right and left in economics looks at the degree of intervention, the percentage of national income that is spent by government. So my right would obviously be no government, no expenditure, the classic example of anarchy. My centre is 25%. It looks a nice centre number, doesn't it? And 25% would be the percentage of national income spent by government in the centre. And then when we get out to 50%, we're moving into the sort of left side of economics as far as I'm concerned. Now, politics, UK politics, I'm going to talk about here very briefly, but it's similar all around the world. It does fit within a very narrow band, which is now left of centre, closing in on 50% of national income being spent by government. And in the UK, when you describe right and left in politics, you're describing right and left in a very narrow band, left of centre. You can think over the last 100 years of this sort of moving gradually from 20% to 25 to 30. So this little thing is moving over from left to right. And within it, there isn't much difference between the three parties. The difference is what they talk about. It's not actually what they do. I actually quite like the quotation that says it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always gets in. And it doesn't really matter whether it's the Labour Party or the Tories or the long forgotten Lib Dems. They talk differently, but when they get in, they do the same things. Now, if you want to be an economist who is listened to, you've got to feed into this little narrow band here. And Keynesian economists fitted into that narrow band, and modern monetary theorists fit into that narrow band. I would explain why soon. You can see me, my initials JB8 sit far out right of centre, probably around 20% of government expenditure would come from national income. And that's where the sort of monetarist economists, the Austrian economists, those believers in capitalism would sit. And it illustrates to you one of the reasons why I'm a controversial figure that no one listens to, because I'm not in the right sort of area for politicians to want to listen to the things that I would say. They really need to listen to things that will get them votes, and Keynesians and modern monetary theory tells them that. So that's the warning. I really want you, obviously, to read all about Keynesian modern monetary theory, listen to what I say and make up your own minds. The last thing I ever want is people to agree with me, because it takes all the fun out of argument if people agree with me. So now you know where I stand. Let's really kick off with proceedings. One thought for the day. John Maynard Keynes, I think, was a very good economist. I don't think Keynesians are good economists. I'll explain why. But Keynes did say the ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Wrong is the significant point here. Karl Marx was an economist who got it wrong, blighted probably 2 generations of people, and was probably the result of more than 50 million deaths for people who didn't quite agree with the overriding communist theme. So you can see it's very important that economists get things right, because they are listened to, and they are unfortunately listened to even when they get things wrong. Now, we need a definition of money. And this is quite clear. This is where we're starting. Francis Walker, sometime in his life between 1848 and 1897, said this, and this is what you need as a description of money. It's that which passes freely from hand to hand in full payment for goods, in final discharge of indebtedness being accepted equally, without reference to the character or credit of the person tendering it, and without the intention on the part of the person receiving it to consume, enjoy, or otherwise use it, than by passing it on sooner or later in exchange. So I tell my students again, when they go to parties and they're asked what they're studying, and they get round to people asking them what money is, then they can quote this definition as an explanation of exactly what money is. And it describes, as we'll see in just a moment, exactly what money is. We also need to understand, because there's a little bit of confusion, particularly in the banking sector, between the demand for money and the demand for loans. So let's get that one clear and out the way. Your money is part of your wealth. Money you borrow is not part of your wealth. You demand to hold some of your wealth as money. You do this for transactions reasons. You hold this liquid resource money as a precaution, just in case you need it. And you even hold it for speculation. Speculation is often confused. It isn't taking your money and putting it into assets, hoping that they will return a capital gain to you. It is actually speculating by holding money. Now, in an inflationary world, you wouldn't want to do that. That would be the very wrong thing. Only in a deflationary world would you speculate with holding money. I describe, again, to my students, just to get this clear in their mind, I ask them what they ask for from their parents at Christmas as presents. And the ones who ask for money are the ones who are speculating with money. They don't want the present because they know that present will be cheaper in the sales after Christmas. They want the money now so they can then buy the gift after Christmas and have some money left over. They speculated that the price of what they want to buy falls. That's speculating with money. That's what that means. So never confuse the demand for money, which is holding your own assets in liquid form, as opposed to the demand for loans, which is wanting to borrow somebody else's assets. Now, I gave a lecture recently called 5 Steps to Fiat Money Hell, where I identified 5 particularly important slots in relation to the UK economy, but as you said, it applies throughout the world. I started with a hunter-gatherer society. I then went on to goldsmiths who became bankers, and an unofficial gold standard was set up in the sort of 17th, 18th century. Then governments begin to realise that there's something about this that's quite useful for us, isn't it? And it started to turn down from there. In 1844, the UK Bank Charter Act is something which turned things towards government. Suspending the gold standard at the beginning of World War I, trying to go back to it at the wrong rate as a result of listening to the Cunliffe Committee, led to the final suspension of the gold standard in 1931. We then had the gold exchange standard after Bretton Woods, which finally closed in 1971. By all means, ask me questions about 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to mention one in a moment, but the others I won't go back to. But if at the end you'd like me to explain any of those, I will. So really, after 1971, we could be in fiat money heaven. You can actually manage fiat well. But unfortunately, governments don't do that because they're not really thinking about doing things efficiently. They're wondering how they can get people to vote for them, or at least support them in countries which don't have votes. So let me just take you back to the caveman to get this one clear in your mind. Suppose I live in a cave and I'm a hunter. In the next cave to me, there's that vegetarian, the gatherer. Now, I quite like vegetables with my meat. So I trade one of my animal skins for some vegetables, but my skin's worth more than the vegetables I currently require. So I see some salt there. I say, can I add some salt to this trade to settle this trade? I don't want the salt. I've got loads of salt. It's of no interest to me to have this salt, except I know that everyone else in all the other caves wants salt. So I can always use this salt to trade with other people. That's money. That salt is now money. It's nothing I want. I'm going to pass it on sooner or later in trade. It has value to me because I know other people want it. So that's all money is. It's that thing which we can pass from person to person. We don't use it. We don't want it ourselves, but it's what we're going to use in trade. So that's what money is. Now we come a little bit more up to date. We're going to look at Keynes, the Keynesians and the interfering politicians before we step towards modern monetary theory. And Keynesian economics is the beginning of modern monetary theory, as you will see. Keynes himself observed capitalist economies which were cyclical. And he noticed that governments tended to reinforce cycles. So when the economy was booming, they received more tax, they spent more. When the economy was contracting, they received less tax, they spent less. So they were reinforcing the cycles. And the genius of Keynes in the general theory of employment, interest and money was to say government policies should go against the cycle, should be counter-cyclical, which means that when the economy is booming, we need to take some money out. We need to budget for a surplus and remove some demand from the economy. And when the economy is moving into a recession and depression, we need to budget for a deficit, put some money back into the economy. So you're trying to reduce the amplitude of this cycle by going against the cycle, by being counter cyclical. So that was Keynes's genius, if you like, in saying that it would be possible to do this. However, introduce the politicians. Politicians love deficits, they hate surpluses, because deficits mean they can spend more money and they can cut taxes. They don't like surpluses, they don't want to be told that they've got to raise their tax or spend less. Along come the Keynesians, and they always use the non sequitur that Keynes actually really meant this when he wrote his book, and obviously after his death it became quite easy to decide what Keynes really meant when he was writing, and so they told politicians what they want to hear, and what politicians want to hear is that they can have deficits. They tend to suggest bigger deficits are expansionary, and smaller deficits are the ones that are not expansionary. I'm not going to say contractionary, but so we get into a situation where we're talking always about deficits. And if you look at the last 60 years in the UK, I think you've got about 6 or 7 surpluses and 52 or 3 deficits. If we were doing what Keynes said, we'd have a roughly equal number of deficits and surpluses, but we're doing what the politicians want, which is telling them they can run deficits, they can spend more than they take in the form of taxation, which in my mind is bad economics. It produces price cycles, it reinforces those price cycles, and article on my blog explains what really happened in the UK in the 1970s, and it was, if you like, Keynesian economics gone mad, with ever and ever higher inflation reaching nearly 30% in 1 year towards the end of the 1970s. And you can also see it around the world now. After 2009, a G20 meeting in London in 2009 suggested all countries should observe Keynesian type expansionary policies and go for big budget deficits. It didn't work. Keynesian economics never works, unfortunately. And this failure of Keynesian economics creates a vacuum. That is, we're looking for someone else to tell politicians what they want to hear, and along come the, oh, have I got somewhere in here? We're going straight to Stephanie. We're going into modern monetary theory, and the modern monetary theorists, the main ones who people read are Warren Mosler, Bill Mitchell, Randall Wray, and Stephanie Kelton. Stephanie Kelton wrote a book called The Deficit Myth. Now, as far as she's concerned, the deficit myth is that budget deficits are bad. As far as Stephanie Kelton is concerned, budget deficits are almost always good, and it's a myth to think that budget deficits are bad. Now, me, I don't think budget deficits are all good, very rarely good, and again, another article that you can read on my blog is why we should have balanced budgets, not budget deficits or surpluses. But budget deficits have to be financed. They are financed by the current taxpayer, future taxpayers, or those who have the value of their money reduced by inflation. And if you think of inflation as an unconstitutional tax, then all budget deficits are financed by current and future taxpayers. No other way. That's who finances it. Now, Stephanie argues that there should be no restriction on government spending as long as there is no above target inflation. And there is, again, next slide, I'll explain this mistake. But what Stephanie seems to avoid thinking about is what I worry about, which is that governments are inherently wasteful, inefficient, and prone to being manipulated by the voter. I never expect governments to do anything well or efficiently. There are some things they've got to do, but I never expect them to be done well or efficiently. So the last thing that I want is budget deficits, more government spending, if I know why they spend it as they do. Now, the second biggest big mistake from Stephanie is overinflation. She says all inflations over the last 100 years are caused by cost push, whereas I'm here to tell her that none of them were caused by cost push. By definition, inflation must be more units of money used in the same number of transactions. That is, more units of money. You can't have inflation unless you've got more units of money measured in the same number of transactions. So you've only got to ask yourself where more units of money come from, or more precisely ask your central bank where more units of money come from. The central bank is responsible for all the inflations that we have had in the last 100 years. And it is actually very difficult for me to get other people to grasp, and this includes economists, the fact that higher energy prices, wages, falling exchange rates, higher oil prices, none of these things can cause inflation. They can cause relative prices to change, and they can cause central banks to do inflationary things, but none of those can increase the number of units of money in the economy, so none of them can cause inflation. So, Stephanie, I'm afraid you're wrong. Every single inflation over the last 100 years was caused not by cost push, but what the Keynesians would like to think as demand pull, and what monetarists would say as too much money chasing too few goods. So cost push inflation is a myth, and it's a myth that the modern monetary theorists don't explain. And here's another big one they don't explain. This is the modern monetary theorists' myth over the cause of hyperinflation. Money printing is the only cause of hyperinflation, the single cause of hyperinflation. Now, there are many different events that cause money printing to take place. Things like world wars, very weak governments, political upheaval, bad economic theory, lots of reasons why a government might start printing money. And MMT confuses this. They think it's the cause of the money printing that is the cause of hyperinflation. It isn't. It's the money printing that's the cause of the hyperinflation. You can have all of these causes. You can have world wars, weak government, political upheaval, anything you like. If you don't print money, you will not get hyperinflation. It is as simple as that. You can only get hyperinflation if you start those printing presses rolling. Again, another mistake that modern monetary theory makes. Now, modern monetary theory does confuse income and money. And I often think that modern monetary theory was developed by a group of accountants being locked in a room and told, will you develop a modern monetary theory? Because it's exactly the sort of theory that accountants would come up with. I argue for many years with accountants for one reason or another. And accountants understand the numbers, and they construct the profit and loss accounts, the balance sheets, and they show all of the numbers. But what they don't understand is the actual flows underneath. What's causing them, which are the important flows, which are the not important flows. And tax is a withdrawal from the flow of income in the economy. Money is used to measure income, that is the input of people producing things in terms of goods and services. And the government takes away a proportion of that and spends it. So government spending is a reciprocal injection. Taxation is a withdrawal from that flow of income. Now, MMT have the mistaken idea that tax destroys money while government spending creates new money, which is incorrect. That does not happen. All that governments are doing are taking away a proportion of income and spending it on your behalf. They don't add money to the economy. They don't take money away from the economy. There's one aspect of government spending that could end up creating new money in the economy, but it isn't a normal event. It isn't the event that carries on all the time. In fact, like Keynesian economics, modern monetary theorists think that government spending creates employment, creates economic growth, and all you need is new money to do that. That's wrong as well. So a confusion about what is income and what is money is holding back, if you like, modern monetary theory. And modern monetary theories say that government spending can continue until inflation picks up. I know Bill Mitchell thinks 2% unemployment is a achievable target, and we can carry on spending and pumping expenditure into the economy until we achieve that point. And then we can use taxation to dampen things down. Again, they're confusing the flow of income with the flow of money. So that then is another point of confusion. MMT, because of what they say, have an idea that there is a natural rate of interest which is zero. Again, something that is wrong. If you have a very low target for full employment, MMT think the government can carry on printing and spending, and they will eventually push interest rates down to zero, and borrowing requirements and repayment of national debt can be continually rolled over. MMT do not understand that there are market rates of interest. And without any central bank interference, these market rates of interest would be positive. That's the pricing mechanism which efficiently brings the surpluses in the economy into equilibrium with the deficit sector within the economy. So the natural rate of interest is a market rate of interest. It is not zero. It's at the margin really, but I know Bill Mitchell is very keen on the job guarantee. Another MMT, politically popular, is to suggest that governments can offer a safety net of a job guarantee to everybody. Great news if you want people to vote for you. As I've said before, there's no evidence that governments ever do anything efficiently. Hence, if they go down this particular route, you'll end up with more waste to drag on growth, misallocation of labour resources. And although a universal basic income, high levels of welfare benefits, job guarantees sound good, sound important, there is a much more efficient way of dealing with low pay and poverty. Much more efficient, so efficient in fact that it would cause the majority of welfare people and lots of civil servants to become unemployed. That's why it's never been introduced. It's called reverse income tax, or as Milton Friedman would have liked to have called it, negative income tax. Reverse income tax can do everything that a job guarantee could do, and it can do it much better than the job guarantee. So you have another thing about which I do argue with MMT, that they got that wrong. Now, this is where the real deception is. And both Keynesians and modern monetary theorists are able to complete this deception because there's a time lag of 1 to 2 years before my monetary actions today show up as mistakes in the future. Meanwhile, government can take advantage of this, because government, if they're told you can spend more money, it doesn't matter, you spend as much as you like, as long as we haven't got inflation, you can spend as much as you like, they can use that money today. It's very vote catching because they can enrich people, they can employ people, they can support all manner of good causes now. The problem doesn't happen until next year or the year after, 12 to 18 months, even to 24 months, depending upon the circumstances. But inflation will soon take off, and then that distorts markets, damages market signals, increases waste, causes that thing that we saw when all of this happened in reality in the UK in the 70s, causes stagflation and destroys growth. That's the deception. It's not an immediate link. If I put some money in the economy now, it won't show up as a problem for another year or more. Meanwhile, in a year or more's time, you can look back and say, no, it's nothing to do with what we did a year ago. It's all to do with the current situation. So that's where cost push inflation comes in as an explanation. I've already explained that's a myth. It doesn't, but central banks are using that all the time. In fact, I've had 2 debates under Chatham House rules, so don't tell anyone about this, with members of the Monetary Policy Committee, where I actually accused the Bank of England of misleading people by telling them that costs were pushing up the rate of inflation. And they were quite honest with me. They said, no, we don't say that. They said, what we do is we give you the rate of inflation in the report, and we tell you which prices have gone up the most, and we leave you to make up your mind about this. So next morning, all the politicians refer to the prices they referred to as the cause of the inflation. They're just symptoms. They were not the cause of the inflation. The cause of the inflation is what the Bank of England did about a year ago. And the Bank of England will admit this if you push them hard enough on it, but they don't really want to answer those sort of questions. And I shouldn't have said anything really. So let's move on quickly. That's modern monetary theory. And as I say, I'm not a fan of modern monetary theory. There are 4 articles on my blog which explain the mistakes in more detail that I've identified there. But I don't want to leave you with a situation of concern, because there is ancient monetary theory, Irving Fisher's quantity theory of money, and ancient monetary theory does work, does explain things, as I'll illustrate in just a moment. Let me remind you what it is, of course. It's a simple equation. Some people like to call it an identity and pretend that that makes it meaningless, but that's not correct. It's mv equals pt, or m times v equals p times t. Quite easy to understand. M is the stock of money. It's the physical quantity of money, which I could measure today. Ask the bank what currency is in the system. Look at everyone's current account at banks, add them all up. I've got a stock of money. That stock of money is in the economy. The speed it flows round in the economy, together stock and flow produce you aggregate monetary demand over a period of time. So M times V is aggregate monetary demand in the economy. And it is equal to the average prices of all the transactions that take place over the period of time that you are measuring. So stock and flow equals prices and transactions, which means that you've got a nominal number on the left, and hopefully you get to a real number on the right. But stock and flow gives you aggregate monetary demand. Gross national expenditure is average prices and taxation, or gross national income, which can be translated into the real output in the economy. So the quantity theory of money is what determines what's going on in the economy. But remember, we've got these lags as well. It's much more complicated than that. If you look at the monetarist explanation, you'll find some very complex equations to explain the quantity theory of money, where all these are disaggregated into lots of smaller variables. But the simple variable that everyone can understand, I hope, is just to look at that and think of stock times flow gives you your average prices and your transactions. Now, if ancient monetary theory is right, this will happen next year or towards the end of this year. If modern monetary theory is right, something different will happen. So you're in the driving seat. You can sit back and watch what happens, and you can decide in 6 months to 12 months' time who was right. The pandemic has given you a lovely opportunity to sort this one through, because what has the pandemic done? The pandemic has created a situation where governments have increased money stock. Quantitative easing has taken place. They spent lots more money. They can't raise the taxation. It's difficult to finance all of it by borrowing. So there is a big growth in money stock, plus M. However, the speed you pass it on from person to person has slowed. Lockdown has seen to that. So you've actually slowed the velocity of circulation during this pandemic, which has had, sorry, an indeterminate effect on inflation. Bank of England's base rate has been kept low. Inflation, you could have even had some deflation, we haven't, but inflation has been kept very low because you've got a plus M, you've got a minus V. So that side of the equation is not having its full impact, but it will. Normality, we might, if all goes well, return to normality in a few weeks' time. We're getting close to it. Now, normality means you've still got that plus M. You're now going to start passing that money on much more quickly. You can have a plus V as well. What does that mean? It means you're going to have higher inflation. And unfortunately, that higher inflation is going to pull up the base rate. So what does that mean? If MMT are right, all this boost to demand that's going on now through increased government spending and new money created in the economy will close the output gap, grow the economy, create jobs, and is very unlikely to cause inflation. That's what MMT would say. Now me, using ancient modern monetary theory, is saying be prepared for resource misallocation, another bout of stagflation, which is higher inflation and higher unemployment, and no growth. So stagflation is coming, not all these wonderful things that you would like to think. And if you read now, central banks saying we're in for the fastest growth we could have had for ages. And all they're looking at is a recovery number. We've contracted 10%, we recover by 7%. That's not growth. That's just a recovery, a partial recovery. And they're describing that as the eighth wonder of the world. It's, well, just look at both of those things and you can invite me back next year if I'm right, or forget all about me and invite MMT next year if they turn out to be right. So has government money had its day? And here we move towards something on the crypto side of things. For those of you who've been waiting for my feelings on cryptocurrencies, we're in for a post-pandemic stagflation. Things are going to go wrong. Now, when things go wrong, you have a rise in alternative ways of doing things. So you can have a rise of cryptocurrencies, or you're having them at this very moment. Now, central banks are going to fight back because central banks are not so keen on cryptocurrencies because they sort of go across national boundaries, and central banks are going to fight back with their own digital currencies. Now, let me explain a little bit more about all of this. Let me go back a little thing about cowrie shells and cryptos. You see, salt was my first form of money. You remember when I lived in my cave, I was quite happy to use salt as money. Now, cowrie shells in the South Sea Islands somewhere or other were used as money because they were limited in supply. They were decorative. People knew that other people wanted them. They were generally acceptable. And they were useful for accessorizing. People like to wear these things and show off how many cowrie shells they had. Now this bit, I'm unsure whether this is a fiction or not, but it doesn't matter. Because there was an intrepid traveller who got on his boat, rowed across to another island, found an enormous quantity of cowrie shells, rushed back to buy everything, and caused inflation and destroyed the currency. Now, that's exactly the problem that central banks have at the moment. Central banks are destroying their currencies right before your very eyes, and that gives cryptos an opportunity to take their place. Now, the value of a crypto only has value when you add the word currency to it. The expectation that a crypto may be accepted as a currency is the only thing that gives it value. The only thing that gives it value. It's because it might become the world currency, it might become an important currency, it might be the currency of a country which has, where everyone has lost faith in their own domestic currency. It's that expectation which gives it value. There is a similarity between gold and Bitcoin, and I've written a fairly long article again on my blog about this similarity, and I'll mention the similarity in just a moment. But the main difference between gold and all cryptos is that gold had value in exchange when it was used as money, but it also had value in use. People would wear jewelry, would like jewelry made of gold. Cryptos don't have that. Cryptos have got no value in use. They only have value if they're accepted in exchange. And at the moment, they're not accepted as currencies. All they are is assets which may have value if those cryptos become currencies in the future. Now, afraid to say it, but I seem to have missed one of my, sorry, got this in my mind in the wrong order. Fiat currencies, you remember, that's currencies backed by nothing. So after 1971, all the major currencies are fiat currencies. Fiat currencies are inherently unstable. And because of that, there's an opportunity for a cryptocurrency to sort of sneak in here, and they're gaining attention for this reason. The first big hitter was Bitcoin, and it tried to mimic gold. You had to mine it like gold. Its total supply is fixed, so it can't be fiated away as central banks seem to be doing at the moment, and that's the problem that we face. So will Bitcoin be a success? Unfortunately not. It has almost all the characteristics that will make it sound money, except it's an asset whose value is unstable. That, I'm afraid, will be the end for Bitcoin, because you can't create stability. Sound money requires stable prices, stable money, and Bitcoin is not. You only have to look at what has happened to the value of it. And I know I argue with a lot of my friends who are great Bitcoiners, and they say, no, it will all become stable in the end, but I don't think it will. When people realize that Bitcoin can't maintain stability, then it will gradually lose all its value, except like gold, it may become jewelry, and people will wear it around their neck and boast how much it was worth. They might say, I got this in the local market, this Bitcoin, for £5. Do you know how much it used to be worth? £40,000 or $70,000. It'll be a great talking piece, but that's what will happen to Bitcoin in the future, if my predictions are correct. There are lots of other litecoins, Bitcoin, Stellar, Ethereum, selections of altcoins, which are valuable at the moment as assets, but can never become money. However, blockchain, in my opinion, it doesn't work if it just records how many Bitcoins you have, but it could work as a very sophisticated system of barter. Suppose I could use, I'm a hairdresser, I can use 100 haircuts and I can buy 10 services for my car with those haircuts. I use one car service, I've got 9 left over. I decide to go green, however, and get rid of my car. I can then use my other 9 car services to trade with somebody for a bike. This is a sophisticated barter system. In a sophisticated barter system, which you can develop with blockchain and computers, there can be no inflation or no deflation. You cannot have inflation and deflation in a system of barter. You can only have it in a monetary system. So blockchain without cryptocurrency could work. However, it would be very difficult for government to tax spending, although of course they would always be taxing your income as well. So just a thought, you know, give blockchain a little think, but with Bitcoin and all the other altcoins, I say to anyone who asks for my advice, go in and out and in and out. You know, when they're high, you can sell them. When they're low, you can buy them back again, but gradually they will disappear all the way to the bottom. So what you mustn't do is hold them long term and expect to make any money from them. So what will happen next? Almost at the end now. As long as government and central banks keep mismanaging the money supply, and there's very good evidence they will, we'll get continuing inflation. This will create a vulnerability for any currency that can maintain rather than steal value, and it may also hurry along central banks creating their own digital currency in a cashless society. The very thing they're doing at the moment, aren't they, when telling you you shouldn't use cash, you should tap and go, because digital currency is almost there as far as central banks are concerned. Only about 5% of central bank money is currency. The other 95% of it is just digits created by private banking. And all the central bank has got to do is to become totally cashless, remove cash's legal status, legal tender status, and replace cash with digits and underwrite all CB digits as legal tender. I bet that's what will happen. You won't be able to beat the central banks on this, I'm afraid, but you know, keep thinking about it. So that's more or less the end from me. There are a lot of blog titles there, which if you get access to the, I'll send the slides over to Carmelo so that you can ask for a copy of the slides. You can read about some of the things I've been talking about here in those blog titles. There's also a lot of lectures on YouTube where Economics Lecture 8 is all about money, money supply, money creation, monetary demand, monetary policy. There's 10 lectures on banking and finance, all of which you may find helpful. And then there's some miscellaneous lectures explaining a little more advanced but interesting things. All of those you can access through John Hearn on YouTube, and the blog is there. Twitter is there if you want to come and have a good argument, and the YouTube lectures are there. Thank you everybody for that, and I'll pass you all back to Carmelo and Firdausi to, I'll stop sharing my screen and then hopefully I will be available to answer any of your questions. Firdausi, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Professor John. It's an amazing presentation. Right? Yes, it is indeed unconventional point of view from the conventional viewpoint. So from the presentation, right? I guess from a layman perspective, those who have quite limited understanding of monetary policy. So I just got this question from a WhatsApp from my friend. So he said that, look, during this pandemic, let me just read the WhatsApp. During this pandemic, so it is obviously we will have a contraction. There's a contraction in all economies, right? People stop spending because we have lockdown. Countries lockdown, trade will reduce. So of course the government have to step in. When the government step in, so they have to spend. So for them to spend, they have to print money, or they use other financial instrument to spend. So how do you explain that in a modern monetary theory?
Right. Well, let's explain it with ancient monetary theory might be the better way of explaining this, because you're quite right. What has happened, and this didn't happen in the past. And there's a nice sort of comparison between what happened now and the Great Depression. Because in the Great Depression, the Wall Street crash created a situation where the Federal Reserve didn't support money. It let it contract by about 30%, and you got your Great Depression. Now, what's happened with the pandemic is central banks have supported money during this period, and they've done the sensible thing. They've had to increase their spending. So there hasn't been an overall contraction in spending. It's been a shift from private expenditure to public expenditure. So enormous amounts have been spent on the health service, on vaccinations, on furlough schemes. Lots has been spent, and the stock of money hasn't contracted. In fact, it's grown, but the speed that you pass it on from person to person has contracted. So you look at the economy now and you think, well, we're not actually in bad shape, are we? Inflation is very low. we're just about to start the recovery, everything's going to be wonderful, isn't it? The point you miss is that that stock has grown considerably. And now you're in a situation where you and I will want to go out, have a meal, start passing on money more quickly, spending. So the velocity it goes round will accelerate. And there is only one outcome here, and that is inflation. And inflation will be a problem because once inflation gets above a certain level, it actually damages markets, damages growth. This is where stagflation comes from. So if you go to, you can read my article about the 1970s in the UK, you started this growth of money process. It seemed to work for a year or so, and then unemployment started to rise again. So you pump more money and inflation went up, pump more money, inflation went up, and we went almost up to 30% before we realized we better stop. Well, we didn't actually realize the IMF said you've got to stop increasing your budget deficits, which we did, and things started to recover as a result of that. So I'm not against what government has done, but if government were going to be really careful here, what they shouldn't be doing now is pumping more money stock in. We're going to get inflation. Once you've got this inflation through the system, if you then managed money and monetary demand in a fairly stable way, it's a one-off thing. And that's what they're saying, it's a one-off thing. But I mean, I could see what's coming now, I could see it a year ago. I said a year ago, you're in for stagflation, you're in for higher inflation and higher unemployment. All the economists said, no, you're not. And then, you know, more recently, particularly talking to some of my friends, former monetary policy committee members, they said, well, maybe. And then the last word they've been using is possibly. We're going to get this inflation, and it won't be long before, yes, we get this inflation, and then we'll start blaming cost push inflation for the cause, and we'll say it's all those greedy businessmen wanting to put their prices up and everything. So we will get that scenario. And as I say, if we do, by all means, invite me back. If we don't, well, you know, throw me on the rubbish heap. I hope that answers your question. It is very important just to look at the separation between the real economy and the money that's used to measure all the things in the real economy.
Ah, okay. All right. Oh, sorry, there's a couple of questions here. I think,
Yep.
Sorry, Firdausi, just let me tell to the attendees that I see that some of them are writing questions in the chat. Please do not write questions in the chat, just use the Q&A box, because otherwise we will have a difficult time in managing. So please place and write and type all the questions into the Q&A box and not into the chat. Thank you.
Okay. So, all right. So we have a couple of questions here. So in the Q&A box, people are saying that billion infrastructure plan costing trillion and are going to cause inflation, and the stock market will be severely affected and prices might collapse.
Yep. Yep. That's the question you want me to answer. Good. Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly that. So what that means is, I mean, people are worried about asset prices now and going forward. If you have inflation and central banks manage to maintain almost zero interest rate policy, asset prices won't be, they'll be damaged, but they won't be damaged as much as if that inflation leads central banks to start raising nominal rates of interest. And there is a simple inverse relationship. If interest rates go up, asset prices go down, and vice versa. Why have we had bubbles in property, bubbles in stock markets? It's because you've kept interest rates nearly at zero. As soon as you put them up, the asset prices go down. So if the inflation causes central banks to start raising bank rate, Fed funds rate, refi rate, all of the official rates, then that will start to impact on stock markets. Asset prices will fall on stock markets, share prices will fall, and property prices will fall. So that's on the horizon, and I think it's going to happen in probably a fairly big and sharp way if interest rates go up, or if central banks really try and hold out on that. Then it's still going to go asset prices down a little more slowly, because what you're doing with keeping interest rates low is saying to savers, you pay. You're saying to pension funds, you pay. You keep the whole ball rolling by, we're going to reduce the value of your savings, we're going to reduce the value of your pensions as payment. We wait and see which way this one will go. But yes, there's a collapse coming. I'm certain of it.
Okay, all right. All right. That's the question from Vishal just now. So we have another question here from Reen Bernard. So he says, thank you for the eye-opening lecture, Professor Hearn. What action is in particular would you suggest us on how to best maneuver our financial affairs throughout the coming years and decades to optimize our financial freedom, liberty, wealth, and health?
Yeah, so take notice of what I say, because I'm not a financial advisor, but you don't want to be in cash contracts. If you're in cash contracts with inflation, you lose. You do really want to be in real things. So property is always a good and real thing, although it's at the top of a bubble. So it might be worth waiting a little while before you buy. But if you're buying real things, then they have a value, inherent value, which you can't take away completely. I remember a long time ago, someone was talking about a property collapse where properties will go down to nothing. Well, of course, that doesn't happen because we use properties, we live in them. They're important things. So it's out of cash contracts into real things. But again, timing becomes important. And I wouldn't be in anything now except the house I live in the long term. And I would be spending my money, enjoying things. And fortunately, as an academic, I don't have much money left over anyhow, so I don't have to make those decisions about where to put it. But is it gold? Remember, Bitcoin and altcoins are not real things. Don't go for those long term. By all means, have fun by dipping in and out of them. I think they've probably gone down quite a long way, haven't they? Unfortunately, when I give a lecture on these things, I then look at Bitcoin next day and it's gone right down until people forget what I said and then it recovers again. So I suppose you could follow my election cycle and then buy Bitcoin after I've spoken and then sell it just before I'm about to speak again. You might make money that way, but there's no easy way to make money. The safest thing is for you to have somewhere to live and spend your money, enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult, isn't it? So, you know, the people in Wall Street, you know, they have a lot of, they know the trick of the trade, you know, they usually can, you know, manipulate a lot of things.
Right.
So, yes. And then, oh yeah, next question. This question, I mean, kind of related with my question, in fact, but it is, what is it? Sorry. Do you think cryptocurrency will likely to cease to exist in this in the future? Like, you know, Bitcoin, right? So a lot of people perceive that. Because sometimes value is also how people perceive. Because if you make a very big claim just now, say that, you know, Bitcoin is not stable and then it is not going to work. But what if a group of people, like, you know, actually perceive that it will be good and people invest in it? It will be stable, isn't it?
Well, I think Elon Musk thought it was going to be stable and good to invest in, didn't it? When I'm not sure what price he bought in at. And then, of course, he sold it all. I don't think he made a profit on that sale, but he changed his idea about whether Bitcoin, whether he'd been listening to one of my previous lectures, I don't know. No, I don't see a future for Bitcoin, and I don't see a future for alternative currencies, because I do see central banks know enough about what they're doing to keep money controlled. I can't see the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, the Japanese central bank, or the ECB throwing this away. Things becoming so bad that they chuck in the towel and say, sorry, we can't manage money anymore. If that does happen, of course, then we'll all be looking around for ways of trying to find something that measures all of the flows in the economy so that we can trade, so that we can pass something on from person to person. The problem with Bitcoin is that there is a limited amount. That once you get to, I forget what it is, 20 million, or I forget the number, but once you get somewhere, there's going to be no more Bitcoin. Now, the whole thing about money is that economies continue to grow, and you're going to have to continue to trade. And if you continue to trade, you want more money unless you have deflation. Now, you don't want inflation in an economy. Equally, you don't want deflation in an economy, because the problem about deflation is the money in the economy increases in value. And when it's increasing in value, you stop using it. So it's a self-defeating thing. If I think that what I'm going to buy next year is going to be 10% cheaper, I'll hold off. You put back purchases, so deflation actually makes the monetary contraction worse. And sound money, you don't want deflation, you don't want inflation. And the whole thing is that with Bitcoin, you've almost built deflation into it. And because you've built deflation into it, it won't be an efficient money. The official monies will be what you still use to measure things. And I don't think central banks are going to throw this one away. If they do, Bitcoins and alternative currencies are going to fill the vacuum. If they don't, they will die away. But you can have a ride on them, on their back going down. You know, anyone can make money with assets going up or down in value, because it's timing and buying and selling, which is the important thing.
Okay. All right. I hope that's answered the question just now. This one is a bit tricky. It's quite tough. Say that. What's the safe level for government spending during pandemic, then to avoid future inflation and stagflation? This is interesting. What's a safe level? Right.
It's a fairly easy calculation to make, which is in some ways quite annoying, because people say, how did you know that was going to happen? And it's a fairly, all you've got to do is look at the broad money aggregates. And if the broad money aggregate is growing at 10% and the economy grows by 1%, you'll expect 9% inflation in that system. If you've had a contraction, if the monetary demand expands by 10% and you've had a contraction by 3%, you might expect 13% as your inflation number in the future. So it's reasonably easy to identify this as long as you get the time lag right. And you can't get it precisely right, because I don't know how quickly people are going to pick up on buying things. You know, I went down the pub last week expecting it to be full of people. It wasn't. So people are not out yet because they're still a little bit frightened and a little bit fearful, which is great for me because I can get a seat. So I'm back down the same pub tonight because it was very nice food last week. But once people get this confidence to get back and start spending their money, then things will pick up and you can go, right, next year's inflation is going to be this number. And it's not, I cannot do it precisely because of these two components. I don't know how fast people are going to pass money on. I do know what the money stock is, that number's available, but to get monetary demand, which is what I need, you need to put those two things together. And all I can do is put things together. And as I say, go back to my slide. Do ask for these slides and look at them. Go back to my slide and look at that one that says, you know, what's going to happen over the next few years, and read what I say, read what modern monetary theory says, and compare them in a year or two's time.
Well, John, on the time lag, right? I remember the dot-com crisis. You know, was back in 2003. Then we have that great recession in 2008. So it took like almost 5 years. So it's not necessarily like 1 or 2 years, right? It can be like 5,
Well,
6.
exactly,
It's all
yeah, exactly right. It can be very quick. It can be very slow. And I don't know the actual timing of this, but if you looked, shall we say, at hyperinflations, so if you look at the Weimar Republic and you look at hyperinflations, you got to a situation where the time lag was probably down to 24 hours, that the currencies were being printed so fast and the prices were up almost immediately. Now, in a stable economy, if you start this process, it's quite a long time before it feeds through. Because what you do is you start spending money and you go out and you spend a little more money. And unfortunately, you don't always spend it on your domestic economy. And you're probably going to buy things in other countries. And when you buy things in other countries, you end up getting this outflow, this current balance deficit. And this outflow leads to your exchange rate falling. And when your exchange rate falls, you get your inflation. And people go, well, the exchange rate caused that, hasn't it? And you go, no, it hasn't. What happened before that caused that? It was the fact you all went out with more money, bought imports, not domestic products, that created that imbalance, which has caused the exchange rate to fall. So you get a sort of sequence of events for firms. If I print loads of money now, spend it out today, firms will look at this and they'll go, okay, people are buying more of our products, let's start producing more. Now, if it's not a general monetary expansion, some firms grow because others contract. But in a general monetary expansion, all firms think, hello, this is growth. So they all then go out and start to buy productive factors to produce more. And when they all go out and start to buy productive factors to produce more, productive factor prices go up. And then people go, oh, that's cost-push inflation, isn't it? No, of course it isn't. It's caused by the fact that this monetary demand has grown and everyone's gone out. We can expand now. And when they try and expand, of course, with limited resources, you get higher prices. Those higher prices were a symptom of the monetary expansion, not a cause.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. The symptoms and the cause.
Answering your question, the time lag is very dependent upon whether you're moving from a stable situation to an unstable situation, or you're already in an unstable situation and it's getting worse.
If you allow me, Firdausi, so the dot-com crisis was somehow a typical Schumpeterian crisis related with an overexcitement on a type of innovation, and therefore there was a natural liquidation at the end of the process and a stabilization of what the market could actually absorb in terms of .com. So it was soon clear that not everybody can become rich just by opening a website. So this was a typical Schumpeterian crisis. What happened is that the central bank attempt to drive the system away from that crisis was driven by monetary injection, and this created the conditions for the 2007-2008 crisis. So the two things are related, because the way in which the central banks tried to cure the dot-com crisis created the assumptions for the 2007 crisis. And unfortunately, the method that was used after the 2008 crisis was exactly the same. And indeed, after 13 years, the wounds of that 2008 crisis are not yet healed in Europe. I mean, the economy is quite flat. So we have seen that probably it's not enough QE to create a sustainable recovery. And the risk is either that we have an economy remaining flat for long, or in a more vibrant moments is that we have this subsequence of boom and bust cycles becoming more and more short because the cure creates the next disease.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. And if I can add to that point, what you notice around the world over the last 100 years is something that I've identified as credit crunches. These credit crunches occur when people lose confidence in things. The dot-com crisis was a credit crunch. The Wall Street crash was a credit crunch. The pandemic is going to lead perhaps to a credit crunch. And all of these credit crunches have fairly short-term impacts on the economy. And there's another article on my blog that explains all the decades of mistakes that the Bank of England have made and central banks have made. And it's exactly that. If central banks respond correctly to a credit crunch, it's short-lived. If they respond incorrectly, it's longer-lived. And the best example of that, again, is the Great Depression. You had your Wall Street crash. That should only have been a credit crunch for 12 months or so. The Federal Reserve made a decision not to support one of the big banks in America, and that led people to lose confidence and other banks to go bankrupt and the whole system to contract. So you had a long drawn out 7, 8, 9 years of a Great Depression. So credit crunches they can be things you've forgotten about. And not many people remember the dot-com. It was obviously important at the time, but it was only really a credit crunch because you dealt with it reasonably well. But the Great Depression wasn't. We dealt with that badly. So, there are lots of examples of credit crunches around the world where something happens and it just stops people buying, stops people borrowing, stops people worrying, and then they get confidence back and it all goes back to normal. So we might only have months of problems rather than years of problems if you get your response to the credit crunch wrong. Sorry to interrupt, Carmelo.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Carmelo, for the further explanation. So basically now when the symptoms become cause, rather than, you don't address the illness, then the symptom lead to another illness.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, now I don't want to drive the conversation too much away from this, but there has been somehow a fideistic development of the approach to interest rate. And I published also an op-ed last year on, do we trust monetary policy too much? In the sense that the vulgata is the economy is down, it is enough to lower the interest rate to get back the economy on track. And if it was that easy, my 6-year-old son could be the governor of the central bank. But we have seen that in Japan, 20, 30 years of low interest rate has not created growth. So to create growth, and most importantly, to create development, is much more complicated thing than just playing with the interest rate.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Exactly. All right. You know what, Prof, John, there's so many questions, so let's go. There's one question here from Jojo. So he asked that on an individual standpoint, what is your advice to mitigate the impeding effect of stagflation? This is tough.
That's right. I mean, what I would like is that we don't have it, in fact, rather than we do have it. So I'll answer this in two ways. It's counterintuitive, I'm afraid. How do you get rid of all of these problems that we face? You actually get rid of these problems by governments moving towards balanced budgets, by getting governments to stop spending money and start releasing resources to the private sector. You get the Bank of England, what should it be doing? It shouldn't be stuck with ZIRP policies, which are actually now NIRP policies, ZIRP being a zero interest rate policy, NIRP being a negative interest rate policy. And in real terms, you have a negative interest rate policy when the interest rates are below the inflation rate. And that sort of, so I would very much like, as I'm sure the Centre for Market Education would, and the Mises Institute and the Adam Smith Institute, I would like us to be in a situation where governments are not doing things. They step back and they try and release resources to the private sector and let the private sector do things. I have absolutely no doubt that all of the economic growth in an economy comes from the private sector. It's invention, it's innovation in the private sector that drives all growth. Governments don't invent things. Government can put their money into 100 things, one of which might be something great, and everyone will say, yeah, they did that, didn't they? By luck, they've done one or two. Have wars, you sometimes invent things in wars that become quite useful in peacetime. But governments are not the people that you want driving an economy and growing an economy. You want the private sector driving an economy and growing in an economy. So I would like sort of governments to step back. Now let's assume that they won't step back. What happened in the 1970s? So let's see how we got out of that, and have we got to wait for this to happen again? What happened every year in the 1970s, our budget deficit grew bigger and bigger, and we had to borrow more and more money. But now, because of the situation on the current account and exchange rates, we had to borrow money from the International Monetary Fund. And I think Dennis Healy was off on holiday and got dragged back from the airport to Downing Street to explain what do we do now, because the IMF were going to lend us money, but they would only lend us money if we halve our borrowing requirement, reduce it by 50% next year. So politicians, that was fine, because politicians could say, we don't want to do this, but the IMF is forcing us to do this, so they could sort of get out of this. Politicians force us to do this, so we actually did it. We cut our borrowing requirement, cut our budget deficit in half at a stroke, and things started to get better. So the beginning of the 80s was quite a good time, and sort of Margaret Thatcher came in at that time when things were automatically, James Callaghan, as a Labour Prime Minister, actually started this ball rolling, but because of time lags, he'd gone by the time it started to improve, and Margaret Thatcher benefited from that improvement. It's difficult for that to happen now. Why? Because every country is doing the same thing. They're all jumped in on, we've got to spend loads of money. And this is where I blame modern monetary theory, because modern monetary theory says, governments, if you tax people, you're destroying money. You spend money, you're recreating new money. That's wrong. But that's what they're being told. So they're going, you know, I cannot believe the amount of governments who've gone, yeah, £1 trillion there and £1 trillion there, and let's do this and let's do that. And it's all out of proportion. Furlough in the UK, we were spending £14 billion a month on furlough for quite a few months of this last 12 months. At the same time, Boris Johnson was saying, we want to build back better, you know, the big slogan, build back better. And he allocated, I asked people this almost just to shock them. Remember, we're spending £14 billion a month on people not working. How much are we going to spend on our infrastructure and build back better? And Boris announced with Rishi, £1 billion over the next 10 years. You don't build back better with £1 billion over the next 10 years when you're, in inverted commas, wasting £14 billion. It's another thing you'd have to read on my blog about the pandemic. I was never for lockdowns. We didn't need lockdowns. We needed to protect all the vulnerable people, and some vulnerable people could have got furloughed, but not everyone. That was a complete mistake. But great for votes, because you're all looking at government now saying, haven't they done well? They've done all these things. You won't be saying the same thing, I don't think, this time next year.
All right, that's very interesting response, because you know the government shouldn't do anything, because that would be a backlash for a lot of politicians, especially during the crisis, right? If they don't do anything about it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the subsidy, wage subsidy in the UK is quite substantial. I mean, including in Malaysia as well. Well, it's one way to so-called protect people, but of course, there's a price to pay after another 1 or 2 years. I think most countries, not all, I think most countries have this wage subsidy during this pandemic, right? So, well, yeah, another 3-5 years,
yeah,
the people have to pay for it, you know.
all countries are following what will be the same sort of mistaken idea. Going back very quickly to the 1970s, it was a good time because in the UK, we were the only real country that went down this sort of Keynesian route, and other countries didn't. We had a worse problem than other countries as the result of that. After 2009, we agreed at a G20 meeting that we'll all do it. So all countries did it and have moved themselves into the same sort of problem. And now all countries are going down that this is how you deal with a pandemic, and this is how you spend lots of money. So the good thing about it is the exchange rate won't be damaged much by this. In other words, every country is damaging their exchange rate. And if we all damage our exchange rates at exactly the same amount, then the relative exchange rate won't change. We all sort of move down together, so it doesn't look as though anything has happened. In the 70s, we damaged our exchange rate because you could notice it. We'd made the mistake and our sterling fell 40%. Now it won't happen. And that's another thing, because governments will then look at it and say, no, things are great. Look at our exchange rate. It's still as high as it was 12 months ago. That's not a measure of doing well. What's a measure of doing well is look at your inflation rate, look at your unemployment, look at the resources that you're buying, look at your economic growth rate, because there can't be an economic growth. There's nothing pushing economic growth at the moment because people are too frightened to invest and innovate. Financial markets and traders, they'll always do well because they're the people who know how to buy and sell. So there's always scope for traders, but really trading is just a zero-sum game. You've only got winners because you've got losers. The only game in the world economy that isn't a zero-sum game is economic growth. You want to get economies growing, and the sources of economic growth come from private individuals, from free markets. They come from people innovating, having ideas, saying, let's do this, let's do that. They're the people who drive economies forward. Governments have no wisdom at all. They know how to get votes. Jolly good idea if I spend money doing this and I spend money doing that. No concern about whether that money is spent efficiently or not. And as I say, the government that can pick on 20 things and go pump loads of money in there, sees one thing take off and it will drop the other 19. That was nothing to do with us. That's what we did. And it'll focus everyone's attention on what worked by luck, not wisdom. Or there are no politicians out there who really know how to manage economies and really know how to support economies and grow economies, despite what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, John, there's a lot of question here coming up. See, so I guess, all right, I think this question is interesting. From Yo Chuan Lee, asks, what is the best course of action for individuals and entrepreneurs to weather through the inevitable inflationary pressure? It's going to...
Yeah, as academics, and I'm sure you all agree with me here, keep picking up qualifications. So work hard, picking up one qualification after another. Eventually, you can carry those qualifications to somewhere that will make you a living. So use that opportunity. How to protect yourself during a period of stagflation? I do not know. You've got to work hard. You study hard. You try and set yourself apart from other people and be entrepreneurial. There's plenty of opportunities for entrepreneurs to say, right, it's my business. I'm going to set this up. I'm going to do this. And the internet gives a great opportunity for people because there are a lot of things that you can do on the internet to make money, which don't require significant capital costs. And if they don't require significant capital costs, you can say, I've always thought everyone would like to do that, wouldn't they? Play this game, buy things that way. So I think the internet offers a lot of opportunities for people to think, what do we do next? Be brave, become entrepreneurial. Don't sort of sit back and think that other people are going to solve all of your problems for you. Have your own ideas and really go for it. And I will, pat you on the back. I was never brave enough to do that. I was quite happy to sit as an academic and let other people worry about things. But the best people for an economy are the entrepreneurs. They are the people who go out there with ideas to do this, and do this. So I suppose if I had to put it into one word, develop your own business, become entrepreneurial, go against the trend, if you like. Don't rely on other people to get this for you. You do it yourself. Get out there and do something.
All right, get more qualification.
More qualification, yeah. Relevant ones like
Yes.
economics degrees and things like that.
Yeah, but the problem is they don't have money to pay for that, and that is a big problem.
It is indeed, and that's this this word investment in your own future. It's sometimes worth just stepping back, and there are opportunities in many places for people to get grants to study, to get sponsorship
Okay.
study, and you've got to show some talent and show some interest, and look in those directions. The one thing that we don't want to do is all become so fed up with this, we just give up and sit down and do nothing and say, come on, state, just give me some money. I would have the state doing reverse income tax, so you'd be protected at the bottom end, but you want to become, rich. And I was arguing with someone recently who were trying to tell me that the 19th century was terrible compared with the 20th century. Of course it was. You shouldn't be comparing the 19th century with the 20th century. You should be comparing the 19th century with the 18th century. It was getting better, 18, 19, and 20. And my worry was that I don't see the 21st century as improving things. I see the 21st century, loads of politicians, loads of governments having wonderful ideas and saying they're going to improve things, but I don't see it happening. That's what worries me, because we're all out there wanting to become a little better off as the next generation, and the governments are getting in your way there. So try and sidestep government if you can, as I say, become entrepreneurial, and fingers crossed.
Okay. All right. All right. So yes, next question. All right. This is related to money, quantitative easing. So do you think that fiscal policy will be able to tackle the inflation effects of quantitative easing? Also, do you think we are entering a debt crisis with ultra cheap borrowing causing inflation? Many people think that due to the booming stock market and the US stimulus is causing asset inflation. Many US citizens were investing stimulus checks into stock market. I think
right, that was a long question, and something I was going to do after the first thing you said. What was the first thing you said there? Remind me.
Oh yeah, do you think that fiscal policy will be able to tackle inflation?
Yeah, that's right. So no, fiscal policy doesn't tackle inflation at all. Fiscal policy can, when you expand government spending and you borrow money, there's a non-inflationary way of doing it. That is, you have to borrow from real people. Or there's an inflationary way of doing it, which is you leave the debt unsold at the central bank and they print against that, which is exactly what quantitative easing is, except that quantitative easing is buying back second-hand debt. But either of those things sort of pump money into the economy. Now, what solves the inflation problem is not what you do to fiscal policy. Fiscal policy puts strain on the inflation, but what solves the inflation policy is monetary policy, what you do with your monetary policy. And it's quite simple. There are two things that you do with monetary policy. One is you manage the quantity of money, and quantitative easing is one of the things that manages the physical quantity of money, or you manage the price of money, which is interest rates. Now, I'm afraid back in the 1980s, there was a big debate, and I was on the fringe of this debate about should we manage money by interest rate policy or should we manage money by quantity of money controls? And I said, whatever you do, don't use interest rate policy, use quantity of money controls. So they all agreed that they would use interest rate policy. And we've used interest rate policy to manage money ever since, and it does not work. And ZIRP, zero interest rate policies, negative interest rate policies, all they do is distort markets. And we're, your markets, trying to educate people about markets. Loans are a market. You need interest rates to be positive to allocate resources efficiently. You don't need someone trying to say you can, it's zombification of the economy. If you can borrow as much as you like and you won't pay anything for it. So I'm all against zombification of the economy. I would like central banks to say we are no longer going to manage interest rates at all. We can manage inflation through managing the quantity of money, and central banks cannot do anything else other than manage inflation. So why not let them get on with it? And I'll just added difficulty. Central banks, you can manage inflation, but I'm not going to let you change the interest rate. You have got to accept market rates for things, and governments therefore will have to act accordingly with their fiscal policies, because if they have a great idea to spend loads of money and they cannot raise those funds in a real market, then they can't do it. You know, we need discipline on government. We need to limit government, and then if you limit government, you might release those resources that will allow capitalism and the free market to work.
But if we control interest rate, I think that is the easiest. I mean, from the government point of view, that's the easiest way, isn't it, to control money? No.
The reason it isn't is that there is a whole spectrum of interest rates. If you like, the structure to interest rates, and there's a secured end and an unsecured end. Now, at the secured end, what central banks do is they bring down the rate of interest that you would be charged at the secured end of the market to borrow money. Hence, mortgages have gone right down to a very low level. The other end of the market, it's not like that. One of my students did this research on their dissertation recently, and they looked at credit card rates, and credit card rates are now 3% above what they were before interest rates were brought all the way down to zero. In other words, the top end, the unsecured end of interest rates is, and you look at interest rates on payday loans and things like that, you're looking at interest rates of 2,000%, horrendously high at the unsecured end. All you've done is distorted the market at one end, which mainly centers around mortgages and any form of secured borrowing. So you've distorted markets by bringing interest rates right down. And you know, it's a big move, because bank rate was 5.75% before we rushed it down over about 18 months to 0.5%. And we said, this is only temporary. We'll soon go back to market rates. And then Mervyn King left and Mark Carney came along, and they said, well, we might do it next year. Well, we might do it next year. And I do remember being in at the Bank of England where Mario Draghi was there. And I tried to get this point over, but it was very difficult to get this point over, that the only way the world economy would get back to normal is if the central banks, Bank of Japan, the big ones, Bank of Japan, Federal Reserve, ECB, Bank of England, all get together and say, we're going to raise official rates together. And if we raise official rates together, 0.25% move every 2 months until we get back to a rate of 4 or 5%, the lowest you can get for secured lending. We get back to that level, then we've solved. But if any one country tries to do it on its own, the shock to its exchange rate will create so much volatility that all the central banks have got to move together. They more or less move down together, sit around a table and say, right, yes, interest rates have got to be higher. We're going to move them up 0.25 point every 2 months. We've got to do this together, and then we'll stabilize our exchange rate. And that's the way to get that problem solved. But can you get central bankers to agree with each other? I doubt it.
All right. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. Before we go to another MMT question, so there's one question about crypto, right? Yeah. So are cryptos going to be banned by government, or will they let it run and wait until it fall down?
Unfortunately, that can happen. Central banks and governments can between them. China have sort of moved in that direction, haven't they? And said, cryptos, you can't use them here. Yes, unfortunately, that will happen.
Right.
And it's only if, I suppose, big international markets might start to use these currencies and just ignore governments, because at the end of the day, a group of countries or people in countries together can act differently from any one country on its own. So there's a possibility, if you like, that cryptos could survive, because central banks were so bad at managing their own currencies. But unfortunately, because central banks and governments really, at the end of the day, control things, then if the crypto becomes too much of a threat, they're going to say, no, it's not legal tender. We cannot guarantee any trade in that currency. So you've got to use sterling, or you've got to use the dollar or the euro to trade. And if people are forced into that situation, then they'll have to use it.
Okay. Yeah, true. Especially in China, they restrict the use of
Yeah.
cryptocurrency. Another question on cryptocurrency. So the question is, even if Bitcoin fell for long term due to volatility,
Yeah.
so can we reasonably expect privately issued cryptocurrency to be here to stay due to some of the following? Point number one, decentralized governance.
Yeah.
Number two, algorithmic monetary theory, supply cap, and immutability, etc. So what say you, John?
Yes, it's quite possible that you can do that. And I think cryptocurrencies might develop just around a small number of things, where people have been issuing coins, if you like, against a small group of properties or something like that. And you can only use them to buy and sell these properties with this currency. So I think it could be used in a small way. I don't see it being used nationally. I don't see people like myself trading in cryptocurrencies. In fact, I don't see anyone trading in cryptocurrencies because as soon as you want to trade in cryptocurrencies, they go up in value. So I'm not going to pass that on. Why should I've got something here that might be worth 10,000 more next week? I'll hang on to it and see what happens. And it goes down 10,000. You go, oh, I should have got rid of it, shouldn't I? But it's too late now. I'll hold on to it. And I don't see it. And people may be able to look for statistics here. I do not see cryptocurrencies being used in trade. I just see them being used as assets, that is, held onto in anticipation that they might eventually be used in trade. And I think this volatility will stop that happening. Central banks will stop that happening. Their digital currency move will stop that happening. And my idea of Bitcoin and those few Bitcoins that are around becoming jewelry, and people wearing them around their neck or in their bracelets and going, oh, look at this, all this cryptocurrency. This bracelet in 2020 would have been worth £1 million, and I got it for £9.99 down the market or whatever. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, I like it when you put the example, the gold where you can wear what Bitcoin, what's the value, right?
Well, exactly right.
Well, yeah.
Gold has that inherent value. I say Bitcoin may
exactly
value, but gold has that thing that people want to wear it, like cowrie shells. They're decorative, and you accessorize with gold, and it holds its value. And of course, as soon as you add a speculative element to any real thing, then its value goes above and then falls back, and above and falls back. So if you look at gold prices over the years, then you would have found that very thing happening. So I would rather have gold around in my vault if I had lots of money than anything else. But again, the problem with gold is that you don't earn any income from it. It's only capital gains with gold. And, I want to spend money. So I don't want to keep having to sell my gold to spend money. The safest thing in life is not to bother about earning much money, just have enough and spend it. It's a real headache becoming rich and spending, having lots of money you don't know what to do with, or no time to do it. So don't work too hard so that you can't spend your money is another bit of advice.
Talking about Bitcoin again. So there's one question here. Elon Musk and Tesla hasn't sold their 1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. Tesla only stopped accepting it for payment.
And what has happened to the value of the Bitcoin that he bought? It's gone down considerably, hasn't it, since he bought it? So if he's holding on, you know, I don't know what he bought the Bitcoin at. Wasn't it around $70,000? What is it now? $40,000? I really don't know what the current price is. So you might go, yeah, Elon Musk is not a very good investor, is he? He bought all of this Bitcoin. He's holding on to it now, and it's fallen right down. And part of the problem was that he said he would no longer accept it. You know, you're doing the very thing I say. You're saying, this is not something I'm going to use in trade. So if Elon Musk is hanging around hoping it'll shoot up in price again, he may be right, because, you know, there are people out there and there are stories out there, and we go, yeah. I mean, inflation, it goes to 15% next year. People say, oh, it's much safer to be in Bitcoin than it is to have dollars or whatever. And once countries start to sort of think differently about currencies, it does have a real impact. And I remember being in Russia, oh dear, how long ago? Probably 15 years ago now. And it was quite interesting to find out that they really wanted to use the dollar. They didn't want to use the ruble. And when I did some investigations, Russia at the time was holding 1/3 of all dollars that had been printed. So all the currency, 1/3 of it was held in Russia. Another third of it was held around the world, and another third of it was in America. But Russia had 1/3. Now that gives Russia quite a lot of power to dictate to things when it's holding such a large proportion of the official reserves of the whole world. Strange things happen.
All right, now going back to MMT now.
Yeah.
So there's one question here. Do you think MMT...
Firdausi, last question, yeah? Then we have, after this, we have to close. So just do the last one, and then we close. And I'm sure that the attendees can write an email to Professor John, and he will be very happy to address the remaining questions individually.
Yeah. Also, if I send my slides to you, Carmelo, can you have them, and then if you want them, they can ask for copies of them as well, and then they can reflect upon them in their own time. Yeah. Last question then on MMT. I'll do my best.
All right. So I'm sorry for all the attending and all the questions. In fact, we have a couple more questions. You know, there's more than 10 questions, but since I've been given the warning from Dr. Carmelo that we have to close the Q&A session, I think because of the time factor. Well, I guess this is the last question. So, do you think that MMT do not accept the law of supply and demand of money?
Yes, I don't think they do understand supply and demand for money. As I say, to think that taxation destroys money, it doesn't, or spending creates new money, it doesn't. It creates digits in balance sheets, and that's all they're looking at. And this is why I say it's almost the room of accountants, if you like, that has come up with this theory. So they can see all the accounting numbers, but they don't understand the flows. And taxation just takes away some person's income and then re-spends it through government. It's not destroying money and creating money. So yes, they don't understand the supply and demand for money. And I suppose to finish with this, just because I've really had a go at governments, and they do deserve it. Governments and government policies, macroeconomic policies, are all down to supply and demand as well, unfortunately. Governments demand bad economic advice, and unfortunately there are bad economists out there supplying it. The end.
Very succinct and very short answer. Great.
Actually, Carmelo, never going to say bye-bye to everyone for me. And thank you for asking me. I've enjoyed it, and I will always do my best. Join me on Twitter if you want to carry on this argument. Find me on Twitter, and we can carry on this discussion. Or indeed on LinkedIn. I'm all around every social media site, even WhatsApp, I think.
All right.
Thank you, Professor John.
Pleasure.
I think it was a very exciting conversation. I want to thank also Firdausi for the excellent contribution in the moderating the event, and University Teknologi Mara for being a partner with us. Also, I want to thank Andres, Amelia, and all the team from Students for Liberty for having made this event possible. Actually, this event was born because of Students for Liberty asked us to do something together. So we responded with this proposal, and then we launched our monetary economics program. Thanks also to my colleague Amir for the technical support. I think it's been a very exciting evening. The discussion will go on. You can follow up our website and social media to be updated on the next events, and I hope that University Teknologi Mara will be also our partner for the next one.
All right, sure.
We keep in touch. Have a good night, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you. Enjoy.
All right.